Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to mentally transport yourself for a second. Picture the breathtaking, sun-drenched vistas of Romania's Carpathian Mountains. Just imagine that gorgeous natural light filtering down through the dense, vibrant canopy of this vast, ancient ecosystem. We're talking rushing waterfalls, untouched landscapes, and centuries-old trees sheltering wildlife. Honestly, it's a scene straight out of a beautifully shot National Geographic documentary. But today, this pristine, highly realistic environment is actually the flashpoint of a major, incredibly contested environmental investigation. So as we look at these sweeping mountain landscapes, a really complex question emerges. Can our global demand for accessible, fast furniture truly coexist with preserving ancient woodlands? It's a massive clash happening right now on the ground in Romania, and it features one of the world's most recognizable brands on one side and some very dedicated environmental activists on the other. To really understand this debate, we first have to grasp the sheer scale of the extraction we're talking about. 21 million cubic meters. That is the astounding volume of timber that IKEA consumes every single year. Just to put that into a relatable perspective, activists have crunched the numbers, and it breaks down to roughly one tree being cut down every single second. That's enough logs to literally wrap around the entire Earth 7 times over. When a company operates at that staggering scale, their footprint on global forestry is just undeniably huge. Now imagine you're hiking deep into these mountains. You're in Natura 2000 protected sites, way up above 1,200 meters in altitude, and you encounter something you really wouldn't expect in remote wilderness. You are immediately confronted by distinct green and white signs warning against trespassing. These signs mean that this vast, ancient ecosystem, with all its natural grandeur, is actually private corporate property owned by IKEA. And what is actually happening on this private land? Well, that depends entirely on who you ask. If you ask the corporate owners, they paint a totally different picture. IKEA maintains that they are absolutely not destroying the forest. Instead, they use a very specific forestry term, substitute cutting. According to the representatives, they're carefully managing the landscape by swapping out less desirable or invasive species for robust native oak trees. Their stated goal here is to improve the soil and promote the long-term health and stability of the whole ecosystem. The absolutely crucial point from IKEA's side is that they believe they are actively doing good for the planet. In fact, their representatives argue that their management has actually increased the overall forest density in Romania since they arrived. Plus, they emphatically state that they follow strict protocols about who they work with, publicly maintaining a rigorous zero-tolerance policy for any corrupt practices among their local subcontractors. But, and it's a pretty big but, the activists from the NGO Agent Green don't see careful substitute cuts when they look at these same sites. They classify these zones as devastating clear cuts. When they hike up to these altitudes, they're pointing to stark, barren slopes that have been completely stripped of their natural canopy. Without the protective shade of those towering trees, they argue the intense mountain sun just bakes the moisture right out of the raw earth. They describe what's left behind as a permanent, destabilized moon landscape, totally devoid of its natural life. And the reality of investigating these conflicting perspectives on the ground, it is incredibly dangerous. Take Gabriel Pan, a founding member of Agent Green. He describes a horrifying incident where he and his team were violently assaulted by local foresters while they were simply trying to document a site. He suffered broken ribs and severe head injuries. It's a trauma so severe it actually forced him to flee his home country and live covertly in hiding. So, when these activists look past the corporate philosophy, they claim they're documenting a very harsh physical reality. They report finding massive cut zones with absolutely zero veteran biotop trees left standing. Those are the essential older trees meant to provide shelter and hollows for wildlife. Furthermore, they allege they're finding logs missing the required blue legal harvest markings, logging trucks carrying double their legally permitted loads, and deep, muddy forestry roads that erode and just completely choke up the local river systems with debris. Which brings us to this really fascinating visual contrast on the ground. Following complaints from these NGOs, IKEA has been documented using thousands of plastic tubes to protect newly planted oak seedlings. IKEA calls this giving natural regeneration a helping hand to make sure the forest grows back nicely. But activists? They argue that if truly progressive, selective logging was taking place, the natural canopy would still be there to foster that natural regrowth. Seeing artificial plastic dotting an organic, sun-baked forest floor strikes them as a massive contradiction, what they view as a very expensive facelift for a failed management strategy. Now you might be wondering, how is this all regulated? This friction on the ground really highlights a massive bottleneck in the enforcement system itself. When irregular activities happen, local NGOs document them and file formal complaints, which then forces the Romanian Forest Guard to investigate and eventually issue fines to the logging subcontractors. IKEA notes that these fines are proof the regulatory system actually works and catches bad actors. Yet activists argue the system is fundamentally broken if it relies so heavily on local volunteers risking their own physical safety just to make the authorities do their jobs. This whole enforcement debate inevitably leads us up to the broader systemic layer, the Forest Stewardship Council, or the FSC. This is the global body IKEA relies upon to certify their wood as green, responsible, and sustainable. But as you'll see, this green stamp of approval is deeply contested. While the FSC promises to combat climate change through sustainable practices, NGOs argue the reality on the ground is a deeply flawed system corrupted by underlying financial interests. Let's break down exactly why activists are so critical of this certification. They argue the FSC label in Romania is practically meaningless because of a massive conflict of interest. The certifiers are paid directly by the very logging companies they are supposed to be rigorously overseeing. Beyond that financial tie, they point out that the FSC's own standards actually permit cutting inside national parks and allow logging in virgin and old-growth primary forest. It's led to widespread global accusations of corporate greenwashing. And here's the thing, while the debate over certification rages on, the sheer volume of extraction doesn't pause for a single second. 61,000. That is the number of separate wood transports moving across Romania in just a 3-day window, according to tracking apps monitoring the country's infrastructure. 3 days! The economic machine driving this extraction is just incredibly rapid and relentless. Zooming out from the beautiful Carpathian Mountains, activists make the case that this issue is so much bigger than any single company or single forest. They argue that the core business model of producing fast, disposable furniture at this massive scale, treating furniture with the same rapid turnover as fast fashion, simply cannot be sustained by the Earth's natural resources anymore. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. As we step away from these conflicting realities of vibrant ancient oaks on one hand and barren clear-cuts on the other, we really have to look around our own living rooms. The question remains, are these pristine landscapes paying a hidden price for our efficiently packed furniture, or can global demand in sustainable forestry truly find a balance? It is a complex intersection of economics and nature we all have to weigh. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.